We talked about this way back in November. And his first major foolish thing was he did a sinful sacrifice. He had been told by Samuel to wait for him. It says in verse 13, to wait for me until I get there, and then we will offer sacrifices to the Lord. Well, Saul waited and waited and waited all of 8 days. It should be 7 days. And then he decided, I got to do something. Samuel arrives just as he's finishing, and he confronts him. He says, why? What have you done? And Saul makes excuses, and you're going to find this out about Saul. Saul is quick with the excuses. He's not a man who chases after God's heart. He's a man who's about himself. And he says, when I saw the men were scattering, and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer burnt offering. It wasn't his place. It wasn't his responsibility. He was to be obedient and to wait. And then in chapter 14, we have Saul's foolish command. And in chapter 14, we have Jonathan who goes out with his shield bearer, armor bearer, and they go out into battle and they take a major position from the Philistines. And the Philistines start to panic, and things start to unfold in a positive way for Israel. In fact, the Philistines were in such a panic because of what Jonathan had done in the name of the Lord that they started slaying each other in their panic. And as the battle intensifies, Saul makes a foolish command to the soldiers in his command. He says, no one shall eat until the enemy is defeated. But Jonathan, who didn't hear the command, came in and saw within the forest that they were in, there was just honey dripping. And so he took some, he ate it. And when he ate it, his eyes were brightened. And then one of the soldiers told him what his father had said. And Jonathan's response, my father has made trouble for the country. See how my eyes brightened when I tasted a little of this honey. How much better would it have been if the men had eaten today some of the plunder they took from their enemies? Would not the slaughter of the Philistines have been greater? So here's Saul in his foolishness. He's impatient. He makes irrational decisions. He doesn't seek God's direction. And so now we get to the climax of his foolishness, Saul's disobedience. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to chapter 15. Mike read a big section of this, and we're going to delve into it as we look, first of all, at his disobedience, and second of all, his response to being rebuked for his disobedience. We start off, as Mike read, it's at the time where God is ready to punish the Amalekites. So God's command to Saul, he gave two things. First of all, in verse 3, he says, attack the Amalekites. And he gives him two distinct commands about that. Destroy all their property. Destroy everything. And secondly, put every living thing to death. Whether it be men, women, children, animals, everything that takes breath, to be destroyed. Why does God give Saul such a harsh command? harsh to just take out a whole group of people like that. In fact, many people today will question this and say God's not a very good God because he's wiping out entire nations. But let's keep in mind that these are wicked people. And God cannot tolerate it. And there's a reason why he said specifically the Amalekites at this time. Now, you have to go back in time. You have to go back all the way to the book of Exodus to find out why he wants the Amalekites attacked. It says back there that the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites. Moses said to Joshua, choose some men and go and fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of a hill with the staff of God in my hands. So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses and Aaron and Hur went to the top of the hill, and as long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. So that's the battle. They attacked the Israelites. And then in verse 14, he says to Moses, write this on a scroll. As something to be remembered, make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalek and from under the sun. So way back in Exodus, at the end of this battle, God makes a promise that he is going to destroy the Amalekites. Now in Numbers 24, it says that Balaam even prophesied this. If you remember, Balaam was the one that was called to prophesy against Israel, but God said, no, you will prophesy for Israel. And in one of the prophecies, Balaam says this. He says, then Balaam saw Amalek and spoke this message. Amalek was first among the nations, but their end will be utter destruction. So God says it's going to happen. He reaffirms it through Balaam. And then one more time, Moses reaffirms it as he's speaking to the Israelites in Deuteronomy 25. He says, remember that the Amalekites, what they did to you along the way when you came up out of Egypt, when you were weary and worn out, they met you on your journey and attacked you, all who had been lagging behind. So they were picking on the people that were struggling. They had no fear of God. It goes on. When the Lord your God gives you rest from all the enemies around you in the land he is giving you to possess as an inheritance, you shall blot out the name of Amalek from under the heaven. Do not forget. This wasn't a suggestion from God. This wasn't like, if you have time, you'll deal with them. He says, don't you forget, you must punish them. So why does God command Saul to attack the Amalekites? First and foremost, Saul is God's anointed king of Israel. You're the leader. You go out and you deal with the enemy. You are to take care of what I promised your forefathers. And then, of course, the second reason we just talked about, God wishes to punish the Amalekites for their treatment of Israel. So this is God's command. And this is what God wants Saul to do. To fulfill a promise he made. And he expects it to be obeyed. So we get Saul's response to God's command. Verses 4 to 9. Very quickly, just a couple of things there. He immediately, it says in verse 4, immediately musters an army and prepares them for battle. So it sounds good. Off to a good start. He doesn't hesitate. He immediately gets the troops ready. Immediately he musters them up. He says, let's go. Then down to verse 6. He warns Israel's allies. Now there's a group, the Kenites, who were living amongst the Amalekites, and they had been favorable to Israel. And God did not wish them any harm, so they warned them and said, you need to move on before we come. So far, so good. In verses 7 and 8, says in verse 7, then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Haviah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive. That's in Agag there, sorry. And all his people were totally destroyed by the sword. Okay, that seems very good. We go on, and we find out that Saul partially obeys God. Verse 9, it says, but Saul and the army spared Agag, and the best of the sheep and the cattle and the fat of calves and lambs and everything that was good. They were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. So they went along and said, okay, this one's crippled, we'll kill it. This one looks good, it's nice and flumpy and plump, and it's going to make nice steaks later, or lamb chops. Let's bring that one back over behind us. God doesn't want partial obedience. In fact, we know for a fact he didn't even wipe out all the Amalekites, because very soon we're going to get to 1 Samuel chapter 30, and David's going to have to deal with the Amalekites again. So he partially obeys. So we get to verse 10. And God reveals his disappointment. 2 Samuel, sorry, it says 4, but it should be 2 Samuel. His disappointment for Saul, he shares it with Samuel. Now it's interesting because Samuel does not know what's going on. Samuel doesn't realize that Saul has basically disobeyed God. And it says at the end of verse 10, as God says, I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry, and he cried out to the Lord all that night. He doesn't understand why God regrets it. But God is laying out and saying, I regret that he has been the one I chose. And so Samuel comes to Saul, and Samuel rebukes Saul. Now it's interesting in verse 12, we get this little hint of just the kind of man Saul is. So Saul has been commanded by God to go destroy the Amalekites, all living things, all property, everything. Do not plunder, do not loot, do not take anything for yourself. And he goes and he does half a job. It says in verse 12, before Samuel gets there, right before they meet, early in the morning Samuel got up and went to meet Saul. But he was told, Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor and has turned and gone down to Gilgal. So it is arrogance, because he thinks he's been successful in his mission for God. He goes and he builds a monument to himself. He built a monument in his honor. First of all, victory wasn't his, it's God's. And secondly, he didn't even finish the job. So we get to verse 13. And so Saul and Samuel meet for the first time since the battle. Saul claims to have followed God's instructions. Look what he says. When Samuel reached him, Saul said, "The Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions." He is full of himself. He is so excited. He says, "God bless you, Samuel. You're not going to believe it. Everything went as planned." And this is one of my favorite lines. Verse 14 is my favorite verse in this whole thing. It shows that Samuel might have had a little sense of humor. Because Samuel's just sitting there going, okay, he's going, interesting that you would say that you completed God's mission. So what is this noise I hear? The sheep are over here making noise. The cows are over here making noise. I'm sorry, did I miss something? You got to speak up. I can't hear you over the sound of the animals. So Samuel challenges Saul's claim that he was obedient. He says, now, I hear things that I shouldn't hear. And of course, Saul's response is again to make excuses. Saul answered, the soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God. But we totally destroyed the rest. Kind of like you ask your child to clean his room, and you shoved everything under the bed. I'm done! And that's exactly what's going on here. I did the job. I can't hear you. There's mooing and there's sheep going crazy. Well, what is that again? Well, we were going to sacrifice them. So Samuel starts to question Saul. I mean, verse 16 is great because he says, enough! I mean, Samuel's heard, I'm just like, enough! Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night. Tell me, Saul replied. And I'm like, are you sure you want to hear this? Samuel goes on, verse 17, and he goes, although you were once small in your own eyes, and he was, you did not become the head, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? Didn't you become king? The Lord anointed you king over Israel. And he sent you on a mission saying, go and completely destroy those wicked people, the Amalekites. Wage war against them until they have been wiped out, basically. So he has two questions. Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord? Straight up. Why did you do it? It's the same thing with a child. Why did you shove everything under the bed? But again, Saul makes excuses. Verse 20. But I did obey the Lord. I went on the mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag the king. Excuse me, you just proved you didn't finish the job by saying that. He's an Amalekite. He's still breathing. You didn't do the job. Then he goes on, he says in verse 21, the soldiers took the sheep and cattle for plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal. Wow. Man, this guy, he doesn't get it. He's caught in his own lie. He says, I did what I was supposed to. Oh, by the way, here's the king. Oh, I know we were supposed to kill all the animals, but we brought some back so we could worship. But that wasn't the command. And so Samuel does kind of some poetic thing talking about the importance of obedience. Samuel reminds Saul that God desires obedience before worship. He says, your worship is meaningless if you're not obedient to God. It's the same for us today. We step in here to worship. We sing songs. We go and we have wonderful worship, but it's meaningless if we go out and we're disobedient to God. He would rather us be obedient first. Now, he still wants us to worship him, and we're called to worship him, but we have to come with the right attitude. Mike read this, but I'll read it again. Samuel replies, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? No, he wants obedience first, Sacrifice is second. To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of the rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination. And it's the interesting thing about this divination is it's going to seek out mediums and so forth. In just a little while, he's going to commit that sin too. As he's going to go, Saul is going to go to a medium to conjure up the spirit of Samuel. It goes on, verse 23, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you rejected the word of the Lord, here's the key, he has rejected you as king. So he has been rebuked, he has been called out. And Saul, at this point, tries to repent. Verse 24. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I have violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the men, so I gave in to them. Another excuse. This guy cannot accept responsibility for what he has done. I would have followed the orders, but I was afraid the men would do something to me if I didn't let them plunder. So now he's caught in another lie, because what he's saying essentially is, well, we didn't bring those animals back for sacrifice. They wanted them to keep for themselves. Verse 25, now I beg you, forgive my sin. Come back with me so that I may worship the Lord. Again, he wants Samuel to come with him so that it looks good to the people. He's not worried about worshiping God at this point. He's just worried about looking good in front of the people. If you come with me, the people will know that the Lord is still with me. And so Samuel reveals God's punishment to Saul. First of all, we already heard, but it's reiterated by Samuel, God has rejected you as king of Israel. Verse 26, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. Now, he will not be removed from office at this point. He will remain king going forward, but he's on his own. And then in verse 27, it says, God has taken the kingdom of Israel from you and given it to somebody else. And we're going to learn in the next chapter, next week, that that person is David. And again, verse 30 and 31, Saul pleads with Samuel to worship with him. Again, this is not about worshiping God. This is about looking good. Saul replied, I have sinned, but please honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me so that I may worship the Lord your God. Now, this is the third time he said, Lord your God. I don't know, and I couldn't find anything definitive about it, but it makes it sound like he's saying your God all the time, like, it's not my God, it's your God. Come worship your God. I don't know if it's true. It's the third time he said it in this passage. So Samuel went back with Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. Now we get to the end of this chapter, and it's interesting. At this point, we still have a problem, right? You have the king of the Amalekites standing here alive, right? So we get to 32, and it says, Then Samuel said, Bring me Agag, king of the Amalekites. Agag came to him in chains, and he thought, Surely the bitterness of death has passed. At this point, he comes out, they bring him forward, and the king is probably going, I'm going to make it through this. That's what Samuel, the author of saying as he writes this. But Samuel said, as your sword has made women childless, so will your mother be childless among women. And Samuel put Agag to death before the Lord at Gilgal. Must have been quite a surprise to him to see this prophet draw a sword and put him to death. But Samuel finishes Saul's work. Saul had no business bringing this king back. He had no business bringing the animals back. At the very end, we get the last two verses there. Saul finishes his reign without God or Samuel's guidance. He will stay king, but the Lord is not with him. Which means he's in for a lot of fun over the next while until he is finally, his life is over. Can you imagine putting yourself in a position where the Lord no longer wants you? We have to be careful when we are called to be obedient. We must not take it lightly. Yes, we should be here worshiping every week, if at all possible. But even more so, we need to be obedient. A couple things to think about as we close here today. Number one, are you available to serve God? Have you made yourself available? You look at the three kings, the first three kings of Israel, the only kings that reigned over united Israel. You start with Saul, then David, then Solomon. And it's interesting about these three kings, they all had very different relationships with God. Saul was the no-hearted king. He had any kind of obedience to God. He was the no-hearted king, no desire for God. He was all about himself and making sure he looked good. Then you had King David, the wholehearted king. He wasn't perfect, but his heart was for God and God alone. And then you had Solomon. Solomon was the half-hearted king. It started out so strong. He asked for wisdom, and things are going great, and then he starts marrying all kinds of women, 700 to be exact. And I can't even picture that for a moment. 700? That'd be too brief. And those women started to nag him. And they started to complain that they didn't have a place to worship their gods. And so the downfall of Solomon was he gave in to those wives and allowed them to build temples to their gods. He was half-hearted. What are you when it comes to serving God? Are you wholehearted, no-hearted, or half-hearted? Question number two, is your worship meaningful? And again, I turn to James to answer that question. James, and you've heard this verse many times, he says, but someone will say, I have faith, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. Is your worship meaningful? Which means, are you obedient to God as you come to worship him? Number three, and I ask this a lot because it's the heart of this passage, are you obedient to God? And if you need a refresher, go back up and read verses 22 and 23. Worship David was rebuked by Nathan. The response to the rebuke is the key. How do we respond? We are all going to get rebuked at some point. Yes, even me, the pastor, has been rebuked, and rightfully so. How do you respond? Are you like Saul, who put up phony repentance and made excuses for everything he did? Or are you David, who when Nathanael called him out, his heart was pierced, as he knew immediately he had sinned, and he had true repentance? In Psalm 51, if you want to read this week, to understand just how sincere David was in his repentance, go read Psalm 51. So, God's response to the two is what's important. Saul, with phony repentance and excuses, God rejected him. But David, with true repentance and a pierced heart, God punishes, but forgives. And David was punished because the child that Bathsheba bore out of the result of their affair died. And God took him. David pleaded with God, but God said no. How do you deal with failure? How do you deal with failure? And then lastly, do you trust God's promises? I mean, you think about this whole story talks about the attack on the Amalekites, right? God promised back in Exodus he'd deal with it. He promised them again through Balaam, promised them again through Moses, and then dealt with them with Saul. God keeps his promises. God is faithful. God can be trusted. God doesn't change. If God makes a promise, it will be fulfilled. Never forget that. Do you trust those promises? Do you trust them when life is difficult? When you go through trials, when you go through struggles, do you trust the fact that God is there with you? Do you accept your rebuke when you have fallen out of favor with God? And do you repent when needed? Saul couldn't do it. Saul was all worried about covering his own skin, trying to look good in front of the people. David didn't care what the people thought. He made sure he got right with God. How will you respond when you fall short? Let's close in word of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you today. We thank you that we come into your house, and we thank you for the time to go into your word. And Lord, we know we have a responsibility. We've been told over and over again that we are to be obedient. And in fact, Jesus, when he was just about to go to the cross, told his disciples simply this: if you love me, keep my commands. Lord, may we strive for obedience. But Lord, when we fall short, may we take accountability. May we say, sorry, and repent. And then may we get back to what you've called us to do. Lord, I pray all of this in your name. Amen. Let's stand as we prepare to close today.
Great is thy faithfulness, thy great faithfulness, mercy, and love. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Pardon for win and a peace that endureth, thy own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow, blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness, morning by